So, have you ever felt like things are moving really fast in our culture? Like at a blurring speed, everything is changing like faster than we can keep up. Like I think about like in 2008, both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama came out with very strong and passionate articulation that they believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's the way it ought to be defined. In 2012, that radically changed. With our current president, we have this like strong support from a large swath of the evangelical church for a person who very publicly said that he has some appreciation for the work of Planned Parenthood and has some moral processes that just don't fit very well with the Christian church. And yet somehow, like, we are in this, like, crazily spinning fast process in our political world. The church isn't a lot different in the sense that things are changing rapidly. We see cataclysmic changes happening across the church, and it's hard to keep up. I find that it's difficult at times. Like I'm telling, like where do I fit? Like how do I make sense of where I belong? And so when we use the term countercultural Christianity, living in an age of sexual and technological revolution, think about a merry-go-round when you think about revolution. The further you get from the center, like if you can get in the very center of the merry-go-round, like, and this is a physics thing, like if you get to the very center of something that's spinning that's not moving at all, like isn't that weird? Like no matter how fast it's spinning, the very, very, very center is stationary. It's like there's no hardly any movement at all. So if you go on a merry-go-round and you sit in the very center, it doesn't feel like you're moving very fast. Move away from the center, and the faster and faster we spin. We're in a revolution, and we're getting further and further from being centered. And it's dizzying. It throws us off the merry-go-round. It drives us mad. It drives us crazy. Like how do we deal with the speed at which things are spinning? I don't think I need to probably create a very strong defense that we live in a very fast-moving culture. So what does that mean for us as believers in Jesus? So let's review some of the highlights of where we've been in this past series. So living for Christ has always been countercultural. We've been hearing that week after week after week. Living for Christ has always been countercultural. Paul wrote in Corinthians, I believe it was, that the cross of Christ is offensive to the Jewish people, and the cross of Christ is also an offense to the Gentiles. Like, there's something about following Jesus, something about the very center of our faith that is profoundly offensive, or it just causes us to trip. It messes us up. It messes us up significantly. And so the cross of Christ, following Jesus, has always been countercultural. Paul goes on to say that for those of us who believe, though, the cross of Christ is the power of God. It is that thing that keeps us centered. It's that thing that helps us understand and make sense of the chaos of our world. It's the power of God to those of us who are being saved. We also have seen regularly over the past number of weeks that the ways of the Lord will always be superior to the ways of the world. Do we believe that? Could we share testimony to that? Like how? How have the ways of the Lord been superior in our lives to the ways of the world? How many of us trip and fall and spin because fundamentally we still kind of think our way's better? That we still kind of have this sense that we have a better grasp on things And doing it our way is superior to God's way. In Isaiah, Isaiah writes, God's speaking to Isaiah, and he says, "For my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts," says the Lord. "For my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts." So our task is to grow and to learn by understanding God's way and by understanding God's way of thinking. Like, that is how we begin to live out the superior nature of God's ways versus our ways. The next thing that we have heard regularly is that when God says no to something, he's trying to protect something beautiful. When I think about good parenting technique, if all you do is say no to your child, they will become very discouraged. And in fact, the more you say no to a child, the more you inflame their desire for independence. Their desire to say, "But I'm not you. I'm me." And so no becomes a very, very important process in parenting. So a 2-year-old that's saying, "No, I won't do that," is in essence saying, "I want the right to be me. I want to know that I'm not you and that you're not me, and I have rights. I have the ability to say no." It's not always out of defiance. Sometimes it is. It's not always out of stubbornness, but sometimes it is. But the ability to say no is to say that I am separate from you. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that we are not something else is the ability to say no. We have the right to say yes, but oftentimes our yeses are just us wanting to people please or just afraid to say what we really think, and so I'll just capitulate and do it the way you want. And so one of the best ways of setting boundaries is to say no. And so when God says no to something, He's saying, I'm different than you, but He's not just saying no, He's also redirecting. And so when we say no to a child, we're not just saying no and then that's it. At least it's best for us not to just stop there. We redirect and say, "However, I got a better option for you. I got a better way of living than your stubborn no." Like, I'm not just stubbornly saying no to you. I'm saying no, but I want to offer to you an opportunity to be very, very different. Something that will help you thrive. So, no, do not touch that hot stove. But here, how about this jar of Play-Doh? That becomes a redirect. So when God says no to us, He's actually saying, can I give you something that has potential to help you grow? And so we have been learning that God is saying no with a redirect to something that is beautiful, something that is good, something that is safe. Jesus said, "I have come that you might have life and that you might have it to the full and to abundance. I did not come just to say no to you. I came so that you might have life." And so when God says no, it's for the purpose of offering you a new way of living. So, as Pastor Brian's been working through this sermon series, he asked me a while ago if I would be willing to speak within this series. One, because of my training and expertise in the areas of sexuality, and like I said in that forum, I never really anticipated or had a life goal of being introduced as somebody who has an expert in issues of sexuality or sexual addiction. It's like no one aspires to that being the thing around which someone would introduce you and say, "Hey, I'd like to introduce you as an expert in this." Like, who signs up for that? Like, I did. That's not what I was. Just was not part. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. I'm seriously, who signs up to get introduced that way? However, in God's grace and mercy, He led me into a place of people helping. I sometimes like to say I'm a professional counselor by trade and by training, and I'm working on my PhD in counselor education, and so I live in the world of ideas and people helping, and And sometimes I like to think, especially as I think about myself as a Christian and working within the church, is that I want to be a specialist in applied sanctification. So applied sanctification is this idea that we are going to make application within a process of becoming more like Christ. Sanctification is a big theological term that in essence means to be made holy or to grow in our faith. And so Brian asked me if I would be willing to come and speak about some of my expertise around the issues of addiction. One of my areas of specialty is in treating people with sexual addictions. And as this revolution, this spinning culture is coming more and more unglued and out of control, I have no shortage of work, sadly. I wish that I could work myself out of a job. But I can't. I get multiple calls every week from men who are in the throes of a sexual addiction, from a wife who is exasperated beyond belief and ready to leave her marriage because of this raging addiction. And so I spend a lot of my time working in that particular area, and then on top of that, I also do a lot of work around issues of sexual identity. And so Pastor Brian thought that he should ask me to speak in this series. And so that's a bit of background about why I got asked to fill this space this morning. And so I want to make a bit of a jump. And I'm just going to ask you to jump with me because I don't have the time to lay out all the connections of why I'm about to make this leap into another area. What I want to say is that addiction and identity and our struggle to make sense of this cultural revolution of technology and the way we get addicted to it is an issue of identity. And I'm gonna kind of make that case, but in many ways, I just want to ask you just to make the jump with me. We're going to talk about identity, and as we go through this, by the time we get to the end, I think you'll understand how I made the jump. Does that make sense? So track with me here. So when we think about this cultural revolution, the question is this a problem of addiction? Do I have to make the case that there are people that are addicted to pornography, to sexuality, to video gaming, to Facebook, to social media, to screen time? We good with me? So we have a real issue with addiction. Now, there would be many people who would say, no, you're making too big of a leap. But I think it's a good leap to make. We have an issue with addiction. The other question I have is this related to struggles for identity? Are we struggling to figure out who am I? Are we struggling to understand where do I fit within this spinning crazy of our culture right now? Where do I belong? Where do I fit? Who? I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. And so we're wrestling as a culture with who are we as a culture? Who are we as ethnic groups? Who are we across racial boundaries, across all these processes? Where do I fit? Who am I? What does it mean? That's part of the problem. It's we don't know. We don't know where we fit. So here's the problem. I'm a social science researcher. And so whenever we think about trying to figure something out, we have to state our problem. What's the problem? So we can think about the problem this way. People are in desperate need to know that they are not alone. People need to know where they fit. Being alone is an intolerable human condition. I have watched people do the most crazy things in order to not feel alone. People will live in the depths of addiction, will destroy their lives in order to have the feeling of not being alone. God said it in Genesis. He saw this problem even before sin ever entered the world. God said it's not good for us to be alone. Being alone is just an intolerable human condition. Even God says it. He said, this is not a way to live. Being isolated and being alone is no good. People will do whatever it takes to not feel alone. And this begins to lay the groundwork for moving towards addictive processes. The first scripture that I want to share with us this morning comes out of Jeremiah 2. Jeremiah, reflecting the words of God, says this: "My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold any water." We trade in a nutritious meal for tasty rat poison. Like we give up the spring of living water. The Israelites connected with this metaphor, or this analogy of springs of water versus broken cisterns. I don't know if that picture shows up very clear, but it's a hewn out of the ground. It's this rock cistern filled with brackish, algae-filled water. And God was saying, you're living in the middle of this desert. You're digging holes in the ground so that you can store some water that is going to turn into poison. And you're going to choose that over me, which he likens to the spring of living water. This is a big part of the problem, is that we tend to abandon our connection with God because we think our ways are higher than his. We think that we have the solution, or that we are superior to the things of God. And so we turn to broken cisterns. So what are some common broken cisterns? You could add to this list a great deal. So I want us to think of two kinds of cisterns. Think in terms of, we have behavioral cisterns, just things that we do. We turn to media. A while back, I got my Facebook app off of my phone, and I remember I was going somewhere, and I picked up my phone to look at Facebook, and the app wasn't there, and I thought, I don't even want to be looking at it. Like, I don't even have it anymore, and yet I'm picking up my phone, and it's like, what is that about? It's a way of turning to something. Something's going on internally. I just want it. Like, I don't know why I want it. I just feel the pull. So I pick up my phone, and it's a broken cistern. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't help me. But here I go. And those can become addictive patterns. Sexuality and porn. Similarly, we can turn towards the high that comes from the sexual experience. We can be pulled to that which arouses and that which is titillating, and it drives this behavior, and it just pulls us in. Drugs and alcohol function this way. It's like there's just this pull. Like, we don't know what's going on. We don't know why. It's just that I just want it. And we often don't even pay attention to what's deeper. We just feel the pull. Food is a powerful one. How many of us ever ate something because we just wanted to eat something because it would help us feel better, not because we were hungry or because we needed nutrition? Like, I bet almost all of us do that every day to some degree. Like, and for some people, that becomes addictive behaviors. Like, it's as addictive as pornography is. And food can be used in profoundly unhealthy ways and becomes addictive. Shopping and spending would be another kinds of process where it's just like, there are times when I feel this sense of like, I just want to buy something. See, buying something gives us power. It gives us a sense of authority. It gives us a sense of control. If I can pull $1 out of my pocket, I can make things happen. And so we feel the pull. If life feels out of control, if I just would go and buy something. Now, sometimes I'll just go and buy my candy bar, and I'll combine two of those together into a very, very powerful process. And so now I can use my power to gain that good feeling of what food does for me. Gambling would be another form of addiction that it just has this pull. We get started and we can't stop. So those are some of the behaviors of addiction that can be really, really problematic. But in many regards, this other side, the patterns, are more devastating and more pervasive, and I would say even more wicked and evil than just the behaviors. The Bible doesn't really say anywhere, be transformed by the changing of your behaviors. The Bible talks about being transformed at the level of patterns. So patterns of distorted thinking, ways in which we think that are not of God, attitudes that we may have, ways of processing things that do not reflect the will of God. And this way of thinking is not healthy for us. And it's this way of thinking that likely is driving our behaviors. We can identify the bad behaviors, but if we want to change, we have to understand the patterns. Distorted emotions or disordered emotions. Did you ever have an emotional reaction to something that did not merit the cause or what the thing that elicited it? Ever react in a way that's like, that was way disproportionate to whatever just occurred? Whenever that happens, we have disordered emotion. Something is happening in our emotional world that does not match reality, but something's happening inside, and it can become a pattern. It's a way of living that's really, really unhealthy and can be very addictive and can be very problematic relationally. And so our emotions just run crazy, and there's it's out of order. Things aren't working right. Attitudes, stubbornness, egocentrism, narcissism are patterns within systems. It's ways of processing things that just simply isn't of God. And it's addicted, and it's a broken cistern. And so we run back to these patterns, things that we always thought kept us safe. But in fact, it was a brackish water of the cistern. It's a way of doing life that just simply doesn't work. Paul points us in the right direction when he says, don't conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed, not by changing behavior, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Dealing with the patterns, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Change the patterns and you will begin to be able to live out God's plan for your life, his will for life. You will begin to experience life as God intended it, because you can drink from the spring of living water. So, let's get to the heart of the matter. Jesus consistently prioritizes the importance of the heart. He consistently points us back to the heart. Jesus said, "Blessed is the pure in heart, for they will see God." Like, people who are pure in heart don't do well in this world. Like I brought up some politics in the beginning. Politics is one of those places in which purity doesn't exist. The ideal doesn't exist. Compromise has to happen. Values have to be compromised. Like, the political world is a place around which the patterns are out of sync with what's healthy. And so the pure in heart are the people who want to live kind of an ideal kind of life. There's a sense in which I want to live consistently and congruently with my values, and and it's like our world doesn't let that happen. And so Jesus is saying the pure in heart are going to see God. Because in this world, the pure in heart aren't valued. The pure in heart are often persecuted and often beat down. And Jesus is saying, blessed are the pure in heart, because they're going to see God. Jesus is inviting us to deal with our hearts. Jesus said that the man who looks lustfully at a woman commits adultery in the heart. And so Jesus connects all the behavioral problems of hatred and anger and murder and stealing, and all of those things become issues of the heart way more than they are issues of behavior. There are many, many people who don't commit adultery, who don't steal and kill and destroy people, and yet their heart does all the same things that people doing those things do. And Jesus is saying, no, we're going to deal with the issues of the heart. So on your note page, there's a diagram. And I'm going to start by telling you a story, and then I will connect it to this diagram. And what I hope that we can see from this process is a bit of how we might think about transformation of the heart. How to deal with issues of identity, of who am I. So when I was, let's say, I think I was in 6th grade. So 6th graders are about 12? Somewhere in that area. I was sitting in school in our music class, and we would have desks lined up, and we would be singing in our music class. And our music director, teacher, was a gifted musician. He loved music. He took choirs around the globe doing concerts, and he had an ear for music. What's happening at about age 12 for boys? And singing and voice. So let me situate what's happening, the age. Like, I'm a 12-year-old boy, and I'm sitting in class, we're sitting in rows and singing. Singing is a vulnerable thing to do, especially at that age, because it's our voice. And if people don't like it, it speaks something about our identity. It speaks something about if I'm worth something or not. So we're sitting in this class. Now, I had this dream. I remember going to a concert with my parents when I was probably about 10, and it was a Southern gospel group that was singing, and there was some great harmony and great music, and I remember thinking I would love to be able to play guitar and sing in a Southern gospel band. And so, like every good parent, they bought me a guitar, and I started guitar lessons. And I was twinging and twanging and driving everybody crazy in the house because it was not very good. And I got disheartened, and I quit. Because I just didn't I didn't feel particularly affirmed in doing it. It was like, you're welcome to do it, but I remembered my dad making clear statements of, we can't sing. Like, God bless my dad, but he shouldn't sing. Like, it hurts people when he sings. It's like, actually he should sing, but you have to really, be far away if you want to enjoy music. It's like, he's not a good singer. And so I'm in this class, we're lined up in rows, and the teacher will listen while we're singing. And he's listening carefully, and he's directing music. And then he walks out in the crowd, down the aisles, and he walks up and down. And if you're out of key, he would walk up to you, and he would stop by your desk, and he'd go like this until you get in key. It's humiliating. Like, what are the girls going to think of me? What's going to happen if someone's going like this and like this? And if it was really bad, he would stop the entire class from singing and invite you to practice being a soloist until you'd get on key. I'm 12. And there were about 4 or 5 of us in the class that became regular stopping points for him. Like, we knew who we were, and he would stop by our desk. And by the time it came for the concert or the program at Christmas and the spring programs when parents would come and listen, he called together a small group of us, and he said to us, why don't you lip sync so you don't mess up the program? What happens in a 12-year-old boy's heart? There. I made a deep commitment that no one will ever hear me sing again. My dream to be in a gospel group and play guitar and sing squashed, flat. And I refused to sing. I would never sing publicly. I would lip sync all the time. Unless I was in my car, when I started driving, I would, for those of you that don't remember, there's something called cassette tapes. I'd put in a tape and I would sing along in my car. But I would never sing. I got to high school, I refused to be in the choir. It was a required course. Like, everybody had to be in music. I protested vehemently. I went to the principal and I lobbied so hard that I was granted an exception not to be in the choir. I showed up in the yearbook that year with a picture of me sitting in the library during when every single student in the school was in the choir except me. I'm sitting in the library, and there's a picture of me and a music note on the choir yearbook page said, "The one and only student not in choir." But nobody ever asked me about it. Nobody talked to me about it. But what started to happen internally for me was that people don't like me and want me to be quiet. It would be better for me not to speak. And from that kind of seed that was planted, I began to become convinced that it would just be better for me to keep my mouth shut. Now, do you see a problem here? People pay me to come and talk to me. Like that's my career, that's my job. And I would get asked to preach at the church that we were attending previously. I was one of the primary go-to people for the teaching team when the pastor wasn't in town. And they would continue to ask me to come back, and yet I continued to have this belief system that people didn't like me and want me to be quiet. And I began to have an existential crisis. I began to say something's not lining up. Because I don't think people want to hear me, and yet people call me and pay me to come and talk to me. People ask me to come back and speak, and again, something's not clicking, something's not working right. But I had this strong belief system. And what happens if you don't believe somebody likes you and wants you to shut up? What's the likely thing you're going to feel? Feel free to throw out some words. What are you likely to feel if you believe that somebody doesn't like you and wants you to be quiet? Withdrawal, yes? You're going to feel a sense of withdrawing. Rejection, feel shame. Feel insecurity, feel inadequate. You feel sad, you feel angry. You feel this host of feelings that are going to drive you towards withdrawing. And so guess what I did? I withdrew. I refused to sing. I remember when I went on my first date when I was 16, the girl that I really liked in high school, I sang in the choir 1 year in high school. In 9th grade, I had to be in choir. And then after that, they let me out the rest of the time. But guess who they put me beside in the order? The one person that I really, really liked, my girlfriend in high school, she got to stand beside me in the choir. And guess what I did? I lip-synced. And so we went on our very first date when we were 16. I took her to a dinner, and we're driving, and I had a tape in, and all of a sudden, I almost started singing. And so she asked me about it, and I said, "Oh yeah, I don't sing." And I stopped because I wasn't about to sing in that space. But I began to withdraw. I began to pull away from people. I began to say, "I'm not going to do it." And I would get angry. I would become resentful. And what's the outcome of when we're angry and resentful and hurt and we withdraw? What's likely to happen if somebody lives that way? You're likely to be by yourself. You're likely to have a greater sense that people don't like you and really don't want to listen to you. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Now, look at this diagram with me. So, life happens. There are people who are really, really gifted at something that might tell you you're not. And life just happens. I didn't do anything wrong. It was just life happened to me. I had a choir teacher who happened to not be very good at educating children in singing because he had such a keen ear for music and no tolerance for it not being perfect, that he would have been best staying as an adult choir director leading people who are really, really gifted, not teaching kids. But he was my teacher. Life happened. It was an event that occurred in my life. Events happen in our lives. Things that we don't like, things we can't control happen. The life narrative is a place in our lives where we begin to tell ourselves a story. We begin to develop a sense of self. What is it that I think about myself? So think about our life narrative as a life story that we have of how we make sense of the world. You can think about it as kind of like the software program in a computer. It's like what tells the computer. It's the gut. I mean, it's the driving force. This is what the scripture would refer to as the mind, that place of thought, that place of thinking. It's that automatic sense of this is what this means. It's a place where we interpret life. So I interpreted life as people don't like me and want me to be quiet. Was that true? No. Was that what my music teacher wanted me to hear? No. Was he trying to give me an insecure complex where I wasn't willing to ever sing again? No, not at all. But in my life story, I interpret the event in a way that is broken, it is unhealthy, it is not of God. It's a way of me making sense of life that does not help me at all. What comes from our life narrative is what I call the affective center, place of emotion, or the place of energy, or it's kind of the place in which the train gets going. It's the thing that has force. And so our feelings, our emotions are a place that have energy. Many people, when I bring up the idea of counseling and talking about feelings, like 50% of the population roll their eyes and say, oh, dear God, don't talk to me about feelings. Please don't make me talk about my feelings. Like, that would be the worst thing in the world. Like we don't want... And so for many men, dealing with emotion, I don't want to ask for a raise of hands, but how many of you ladies ever said, I wish my husband would emotionally connect with me more than he does? Or be willing to talk about what he feels? So for many men, talking about feeling is a place that's really, really difficult. And so we've been socialized in our culture as men not to feel. But we all have them. We all have an internal world. We all have things which energize us and drive us. We often just don't have the words to talk about it. Or we're scared to talk about it because the last thing we want to do is have to express our feeling or talk about it. And so we just we bottle it up. But what happens is what comes next is our behavior flows from what we feel, from that energy, from that train. It's like our actions always are connected to what's going on in our emotional world. It's like we might not know it, but it's there. And part of our task of transformation is to understand what's going on in the internal world and what's driving our behavior. And so we begin to act. I withdrew from my friends. I became difficult to be around. I would get mouthy at people. I lost a lot of friends in high school as I wrestled with this internal process. There were a lot of other factors than just this one story, but it's part of that whole. It's like my behaviors now came out and had an effect. One of the things that's really, really sad is that there is such a thing as, I shouldn't say it's sad, it's probably a good thing, but there's the law of sowing and reaping. We reap what we sow. Like, there is a cause and effect. We have responsibility as people for the outcomes in our life. Now, we're not the only factor in that, but boy, oh boy, like if we try to disconnect our behaviors from what's happening, the effects that we have in life, we simply aren't drawing the lines very well. It's like if I poke you in the eye and then you punch me in the teeth, and I am really, really mad that you punched me in the teeth, but I don't draw any connections back to that I poked you in the eye, something's wrong with me. Like, I got an issue. If I mouth at you and then you cut me off, there's a cause and effect that occurs in life. And oftentimes our behaviors have an effect, and we disconnect from the effect. We don't even think about how our behaviors are influencing that process. The effect almost always reinforces what we believe. And what happens is I came to have evidence that people don't like me and want me to be quiet. That actually moved from being a lie to becoming truth. It's like people actually stopped liking me. People actually didn't want to hear what I had to say. because of the effect. Now, it's rooted in a lie. It starts as a lie. But sadly, what happens is it becomes true over time. And you keep the patterns going. This is why Paul talks about the patterns. Is if that pattern keeps going, the very thing we fear becomes reality. Proverbs talks about it, that the person who lives in their fear comes upon them. It's like we self-prophesy. We fulfill it. And this process just goes round and round. So this little arrow of the addiction process is sexually, culturally, technologically, we behave in ways. The addictive process is precisely for the purpose of changing what we feel. Without any sense of connection to the effect. So rather than changing in a way that could radically change our lives, we radically do things in order to change what we feel while continuing destructive patterns that go back around up to the life narrative, confirm our story and what we're feeling, and we got to do more and more and more addictive stuff to get the same effect because this cycle just keeps going around. You can't separate our behavior from the effect, but that's precisely what addiction does. And so we withdraw from people, and I pull out my phone, and rather than talk about feeling anxious or feeling afraid or feeling something, I'll go to my phone and I will immerse myself in a game. Or I will turn to pornography because I'm feeling undesirable and I don't feel that people love me and I don't feel like I have anybody who cares about me. And so I can turn to porn and it changes what I feel. All of a sudden, for a brief period of time, I have this fantasy in which I am God. And the porn star will do whatever I want her to do. And there's no connection to the effect on that. There's no connection to the relational damage that will cause. There's no connection to what that will do spiritually in my life and heart. There's no connection to how that impacts my brain and how that impacts my life. And we become hijacked by the addiction. And so we keep spinning between behavior, trying to change what we feel, and that process is just spinning while we continue to get the effect of our behavior. Drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, food, money, etc., etc., etc. And we just spin around in that circle. Paul says it this way in Ephesians 2. It's a sobering scripture. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live, when you followed the ways of this world and the ruler in the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. This is what I would call the circle of death. We're stuck. We can't just break out of it. It keeps going and just keeps going. And we keep turning to things. We keep going to the cisterns of brackish water, trying to find our way out. Trying to feel something differently than when we feel, and it never works. And we get discouraged, and it gets more complex, and it gets deeper, and we try new things, and those things break us too, and slowly our lives get out of control. And the first step of the 12-step program in addiction recovery is we've come to understand that our lives are unmanageable. I cannot do this. I need someone greater than me to restore my sanity. Because addiction is an insanity. We keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping to get a different result, and we never do. And so we're stuck. And Paul calls it this. Now, the good news is that this is Ephesians chapter 2. Next week, we're going to talk about Ephesians chapter 1, in which Paul paints a very powerful picture of how we move out of that cycle. Again, Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I'm going to talk about what does it look like for us to experience renewal. So some things to think about. Worship team, you can come on up. I want you to reflect on the back of your note page what are some common narratives that you embrace that are not from God? What are the one-liners that you might think? People think I'm stupid. It may be more complex than that, but But what are the common narratives that you embrace that are not from God? Where do you turn for your sense of worth, identity, belonging? What patterns do you want or need God to transform in your life? And are there behaviors that you engage in for the purpose of simply changing what you feel? It's one of the most powerful ways to discover that something's not right in our life. If we're just turning to behaviors to change what we're feeling without addressing anything other than we just do it to get the feeling. And those would be good places to reflect and think about and pray about. Of God, how do you want to change my life? And then next week I'll introduce you to, I think, what Paul writes very eloquently in chapter 1 about how do we break out of that kind of cycle. So I encourage you to spend some time in prayer and reflection before next week. Blessings.